because I just admitted that I would do this again, and this could get back to one of the teachers. I don't want them to know that I've had a transformation. But one of the things that I think is hard for these students, these young people, came to me, so that's why I was very interested in how they were, is something that if you had seen the play Dear Evan Hansen, it just came through Denver. It's gone now, Dear Evan Hansen. Evan Hansen is this little boy in elementary school. And I think, yes, he hasn't, or no, he's in high school now. He's in high school now. But I think it's the same problem that builds up. And Dear Evan Hansen, he's supposed to write a letter to himself saying what a good day it will be and why. But in fact, Evan Hansen is pretty depressed because he's dealing with a seemingly universal issue with his age group. Does anybody love me unconditionally? What it is. He doesn't use that word in the play. Does anybody care? Do I matter? Would anybody remember me when I'm gone? Things like this. So the thoughts, and actually in the play, one of the students who's also can't seem to fit in just kills himself. And then the rest of the play is about the dead student and Evan Hansen and so on and so forth. And so Evan Hansen does all that he can do, seemingly even against his own sense of what's right, to be liked. He gets caught up in a situation that he continues to pursue because he's liked. People talk about him. People are remembering him, even though his life is a complete lie. And the end of the play, finally Evan Hansen just stands up straight. Now he's in, I think, first year of college. And he stands up straight. Something has happened. Evan Hansen has finally grown through it and says, just be Evan Hansen. That is, he's basically a good kid. But he can't get that because he lives based upon the gaze of other people. How people are looking at me tells me who I am and what my worth is. And you cannot learn who you are if the gaze of other people is corrupted by their own difficulties. Maybe they're having some of the old problems. So very often your very peers, their gaze is warped, shadowed by their own shortcomings and difficulties. Or, as Thomas Keating would call their programs for happiness. Lots of people have a damaged vision of one another. It's why we're judgmental. It's why we put people down. It's something about ourselves. And so, unless you know someone who loves you unconditionally, which is what everybody would like, that's the person who gaze, you can see the best of you. Actually, you can see all yourself, and that you are accepted and loved. And that's what we would really like to have. And that's the gaze of God. And God is always gazing on us, if you will. Staying with this image. God is always gazing on us. And God has no issues. God isn't upset. God made us in God's image and likeness. God is fine with us, with our faults and failings we work on and so on. As I just told you, we're going with the students, and God works on that. But God didn't love me more and accept me more because I went with those students. I was just as loved. But what I got to enjoy is the gaze of God, not getting myself in the way. Because we start looking at ourselves as damaged goods, it's not going to work. We are human beings. That means we are not perfect. That's a lot different than damaged goods, which is the way we often feel. We're a bunch of damaged goods. And what we have to begin to do, I think, is to say to ourselves each day when we get up, how am I going? I need to learn how to be, use my own self, I need to learn how to be 75 years old with skin cancer, okay? Not get up and whine because I have to have this Mohs treatment done in less than 2 weeks. That's when the doctor finishes, you look like Frankenstein, okay? All stitched up on your face. But what I have to say to myself is not, oh, poor me, oh, woe me, like the guy who was going on the field trip with the students, but rather, how do I be Terry Ryan at this age with skin cancer today? How can I live out the best of me? How can I learn to be the best of me given whatever's happening? So you get up each day and you got arthritis, or you got a cold, or you just got a new knee. So you say, how do I live today being whatever age I am with my new knee? Rather than, oh, my knee aches, what am I going to do, blah, blah, blah. So that's beginning to look at ourselves in some positive fashion, because that's the way God sees us. Oh, I love you, you have a new knee. I love you, you have the flu. I love you, you got skin cancer. Whatever it is, we just have to learn to get into it. And that contemplative practice is where we have no intermediary telling us about ourselves or God. It's simply a direct encounter with the unconditional loving gaze of God upon us. We see ourselves through the gaze of God. That's what the contemplative practice is. That's the mystical experience. That's what mystical means. No body, no culture enters in to distort this truth of how God sees us. Now, an example here is Thomas Keating. Thomas Keating passed away, I think it was October 25th, in the monastery in Spencer, Massachusetts. He wasn't sick with anything. He was old. He was 95 years old, and he died being old. And one of the things Thomas said several years ago, when people thought he might die then, which he didn't, was he was curious about seeing what things were like after you're dead. What's it going to be like when we say the other side? He was curious to see what it's going to be. So he was very interested in it and well prepared for it. He was sort of ready to go. But what you would notice about Thomas Keating, there'll be a couple of things, because I've lived a lot of months at that monastery for 15 summers, and now some I'll be up there next week, I hope, some in the wintertime now. Thomas Keating, for the last several years, was not traveling around. He was just in the monastery as one of the monks, and he walked along with his walker. And sometimes he'd walk without anything, and he did have a cane. And he'd walk those long corridors, go to his mailbox, or he'd make his own breakfast. He'd make his own supper in the evening. So you got to see Thomas around here and there. But every time, or sometimes you just sit and chat with him. But every time he saw somebody, he had this bright smile, these bright eyes, a bright smile. As he looked at you, really looked at you, and didn't just take a glance, looked at you, and you had this sense of, that was the holiness of him, or that's the God presence shining through a contemplative, through them. In other words, God uses somebody like Thomas Keating to help another person to see God through the way Thomas Keating looks at you. And he always felt very good about that. So you could be feeling full of self, or full of some issue, whatever you're thinking about that's usually not all that important, but you're into yourself. And then Thomas would look at you and you just, feel much better. So that's an example of what begins to happen as you deepen your own contemplative life. Is the way you are with people, or the way you gaze at them, if you will, not just simply looking at them, but looking at them and being with them, they will feel better about themselves because of the way you are with them. And I think that was one of the things that Keating taught us without, I don't remember ever saying that, but you could see he became that. That was always ongoing. I never saw him not like that. And as he was just around the monastery, he never complained about his whatever his aches and pains were. And he had his back fused because he was in a car accident. That's not fun. But he was able to just have that way about him, and I think it was a product of his contemplative life and the centering prayer method that he tried to teach so many people. So I keep that particular thing in mind. And I found that when Keating was teaching, he was teaching out of his experience more and more. He was the kind of person that he didn't teach catechism. Catechism is basically teaching you the answer. I don't know what kind of teaching that is. I mean, when I was at the museum, they don't teach you the answer. You had to figure out the answer, and they thought there was a learning experience in figuring it out. You teach catechism, you basically tell the people the answer, explain why it's the answer. If they don't agree, they go to hell. You know, what are you going to do? So, that's not learning. Keating wasn't that way. Thomas Keating taught out of his experience, and his experience of the experience as he saw in other mystical writers, such as Teresa of Avila was a big one with him. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, I know, was very big with him, the whole things on her. And he would refer to them, but you got it over the years. So you'd refer to them, and then you'd go and you'd look it up, and you'd say, she didn't say that. But the thing is, well, she did, if you could see it through his eyes. So he was interpreting, if you will, not just, because you could go read the book and find out her, 3 stages to union. But it was explaining it through the experience of another person. And I think that was something that was very special about Thomas Keating. And one of the things that drew people to Keating, because of the way he would combine and bring things together. And he had a great optimism about the human person. So you could go to Thomas Keating and you could tell him some of what you thought was the worst things in your life. And he never was upset. He was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. He was never that way. And sometimes he would pull out a book and say, this book might help you in whatever thing you brought up. But there was never a sense that whatever you did was beyond the pale, or that God couldn't care for you or didn't love you. And he always walked away saying, well, if Keating could handle all that, then maybe God can too. And so he became, I think, a great confessor, if you will, or a great confidant, or a great, I think, wonderful spiritual director, because you could be so honest with him and not worry about him saying, well, I don't want to see you anymore because you're a worthless human being, something like that. He never was that way. So I think it was a great example of what it is like to be living this life for, he was 95, for as long as he did, and consistently staying with it. So he was one. Another, I think, one in terms of sacred gaze. If you've been up to the monastery, you've actually met this fellow, Joseph Boyle, who died 4 days before Thomas Keating. Joseph Boyle was the abbot at Snowmass Trappist Monastery for 33 years. He was the only abbot I knew. There's only been 2 abbots there. Keating was not an abbot because it was not a monastery. It has to be a monastery to be an abbot. It was a priory, you can be a prior. You're the superior, but you're not an abbot. So there was only 2 abbots there. Michael Abdo was the first one, and the second one was Joseph Boyle. So Boyle's the only one I knew. And he didn't do a lot of teaching, as Keating did, public teaching. And most of the Trappists don't really do that. The Trappist thing is not going around teaching. A couple do, but most just don't do that. But he did a lot of teaching in the monastery because he's the Abba, the father of all the monks. So he would give conferences, especially in the wintertime when people weren't so much out on the ranch, the farm. But one of the things that struck me about Joseph Boyle, the abbot, Father Joseph Boyle, was that he was consistently out front greeting people when they left daily Mass. He would go outside and he'd talk to different people. And what I also noticed on Sundays, when there were more people there, as our Sunday Mass, we might, in the summertime, which was most of the time I was there, in the summertime you could get over 100 people squeezing into our little chapel. But before Mass, all the monks would one by one gather and sit in their little chairs in the choir, if you will, in the chapel, but not the abbot. The abbot was out front, greeting people as they walked into church. And then afterwards, he would greet people. Afterwards, he stood in a place so you looked at all the other monks who wanted to go outside and greet you. Some didn't. And then the last one was the abbot. So he'd greet you coming in, unless you were late, because you had to be at church. And he'd greet you when you left, and he'd talk to people, and he would look people in the eye, and he would remember things about them. He was very good at remembering names. Now, I'm not saying that's going to come with contemplative practice, but he was very good at remembering names. But he had a way of engaging you. And Trappists are not particularly known for being extroverts. Most of us are introverts. But he was an extrovert. So he was, which is a great loss to the Snowmass Trappist Monastery, because I don't think there's an extrovert there to replace that kind of extroversion. So I don't know what they're going to do. They haven't elected another abbot yet. The monks could decide among themselves. They could have a superior come in and tell them. They could want a monk from someplace else, but I don't know. They haven't got one yet. So, but that was the thing about Joseph Boyle, and he was a regular practitioner of contemplative prayer. In the mornings, we would start out our what's called vigils. That's in the night prayer. That's the first prayer of the day. Although it's not day, it's dark. And that started with us at 4:30 in the morning. Went to about 5 after 5 or so. And most of the monks would leave. But Joseph Boyle would stay, and he would sit there for a half hour to sometimes an hour, because I would stay there for a half hour myself. And that was when he did his centering, or I'm sure by not just his contemplative practice. And in the evening, we were supposed to gather somewhere between 5:30 and 6, and he would come for a half hour of that. And because I would come for a half hour or two, so someplace in there. So I know that he was doing at least these 2 times a day, a half hour a day, which is what Keating recommended. So the abbot was a practitioner. Not every monk in the Trappists does contemplative prayer that way. Don't think that they're all, you become a Trappist because you want to be a contemplative. Not all of them do. They do it differently. And maybe they do get into a contemplative moment through the rosary or through the Stations of the Cross or whatever. But not all of them are that way. So, but Joseph Boyle was, I think, for any monk who came there, they would see him modeling this kind of practice. And then the results of it is the way he is with everybody. And he was that way in the monastery itself. He was just always seemingly a pleasant person, always a hello. And he was supposed to die one night, and I was there, and all the monks came in to say goodbye, but he didn't die. He stayed alive for another 8 or 9 days, And but I had to go back, and then he finally died of cancer. So, but that's two examples of people who model this practice and the results of it in the way they are with one another. And I think even if you are an introvert like myself, an introvert to go to a museum for many hours with 50 urchins is, that's a lot of extroversion. So, but you can still be yourself and do some of this kinds of stuff. You never know what God's plan is for you. You could be doing this practice, and God's plan for you is you don't do any of that stuff. I know, read stories of people who were very extrovertish in their ministries and their lives, and then they got to a certain age and they just said, that's it. And they went to a hermitage, never heard from them again. You heard from them, but they never went out and did any public ministry again. They just went into their contemplative practice. You don't know what God's plan is for you. But if you have trouble wondering if God is gazing on you, one of the things that Carlo Corretto recommends this. Now, Carlo Corretto, 20th century guy, he was very public. I think bishop and doing all kinds of public things, working, helping the poor. Very public person, living a very public ministry, and felt a call somehow to go live in the desert, like Charles de Foucault. So he goes and lives in the African desert for 10 years. Then he came back and did this ministry, did more ministry. But while he was in the desert for these 10 years, he said one of the things he discovered when you're in the middle of the desert are the stars, because there's absolutely no light. Even in the monastery, we have light from surprising towns that are not even seemingly nearby. They could be 15, 30 miles away, and yet the light of those towns, Carbondale and Basalt and so on and so forth, Aspen, Snowmass, they just, you can see them somehow in the sky. Plus we have our night lights around. So you really have to walk away and just look at the sky with the coyotes, and who would see you at supper, midnight snack. But if you can look at the stars at 8,000 feet, it's magnificent on a clear night. But if you can, so the desert has absolutely no light. And Corretto would look up at the stars, and it's that image of God revealing how God is gazing upon us in God's magnificence. You see the number of stars that we can see where the atmosphere is relatively clear and there's no light. And you just get this great sense. So I ran outside after reading that. Well, it was cloudy here. I couldn't even see the 10 stars that you could see in Boulder. But the idea being that God is always looking upon us, and go out in the middle of the night and look up at a clear sky, and you say, wow, it's all God's creation, magnificent, and little me, and God's looking upon little me with great love, tenderness, and no judgment. And that's the kind of gaze we want. So in a sense, we want to not have a what can be called the looking glass self. The looking glass self is the self that looks at ourselves distorted by the culture, the world, and people around us who are damaged one way or another in judging us, in competing with us, maybe because of their own false pride and so on and so forth. So this kind of negativity that can surround us and get inside of us so that we begin to believe what they say, what we feel they're saying, and then we repeat it to ourselves. I was at a meeting last night, and there were a bunch of, I call them young people. From my perspective, they're young people. So they're at least under 40, Okay, that's young to me, under 40. And they're talking about living, and one of them actually was born in Boulder. I don't meet many people actually born in Boulder who are that old, So he born in Boulder, raised in Boulder, and came from a family that was well-to-do. It sounded like a very, typical Boulder Valley family. They had a lot of nice stuff. He went to a really good school. He had good clothes. He said, but there was no emotional life in his family. And then others would reflect this. And what he meant was there was never a sense that he could just be himself and be loved. He could be approved of by the things he did well that they liked. And they would get a sense of approval, but not a sense of being loved just as I am, much less the opportunity to talk about my difficulties, my struggles, all growing up issues. And, I thought about that with the little children, and I said, I wonder if my just being here and being somewhat of a pleasant human being might someday say, I wonder if I could talk to Father Ryan about my difficulties. Because their difficulties are simply trying to get from 11 to 12. That's their difficulty, but they've never been 11, going on 12. When you think about it, every day is a new experience. When I think about these children, I'm going to lose the point I was trying to make, but I'm going to. Think about these children, every day they could be trying to figure out, how can I be me as an 11-year-old today with my issues? That really could be the focus of their life, because they're not going to be that age again. Much less think about how they're going to be when they're 50 or 60 or something like that. So I look upon these children, I say, I wonder when they get to grow up, they can kind of ask me about things, because they trust that I'm not going to put them down. They trust that I'm going to care, that I'm going to accept them, that I'm going to, kind of cheer them on and trying to grow and be all that they can be, that kind of a thing. So when we have this, the young people talking yesterday, they didn't sense that they had the adults in their lives simply approving of them being themselves without accomplishing anything, much less people to whom they could speak about their feelings and their emotions. And the results of that, or at least they were making the connection, whether that was it or not, but they were making a connection between that and then their later bad response to life. And now they were trying to find a better way to live, given these situations that went on before. And so I'd like to be the kind of person so that at least as you're passing through, you sense that you met somebody who approved of you just being you. And you could, with whatever the faults and failings that you might have, just a positive person. And I think that will come out and can come out through a more meditative practice where we can assess that we are loved unconditionally by God. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to do something. We have these penance services coming up. You'll see them in various bulletins. And some people are encouraged to go to confession. I say to myself, well, why are you going? Are you going so that you can get a clean slate and be in good relationship with God, so that God will like you, so that you'll get to a good place with God? That way, your confession is a little bit of negotiations, a little bit of control mechanism, a little bit of security to get with God. On the other hand, which I think is somewhat adolescent, because I've been there, I know it. On the other hand, could confession be where I know that I am unconditionally loved by God, God is never going to leave me, is always within me, but my faults and failings get in the way of enjoying it. So confession becomes an opportunity for me to look at and say out loud, sort of like a fifth step in AA, to say out loud, these are faults and failings that I'm seeing in myself, and I'm looking at them, and I'm going to tell another person. And hopefully that other person doesn't say, oh, you're going to hell. 10 rosaries, or go to Rome on your knees, or something like that. To what? To get God to love you? Or is any of that going to get rid of your faults and failings? But rather, to hear that in spite of that, God loves you, but because you're looking at your faults and failings, maybe you're willing to work on them, or even better, to humbly admit, and I think Keating talks about this, to humbly admit that I left to my own devices and not overcome them. I firmly resolve, with the help of your grace, to sin no more. It's the help of your grace. But I think a lot of people go to confession thinking they're not going to do this sin that they've been doing all their life because of this confession. And they're just going to do it over again, left to their own devices. So confession allows for humility to say, Lord, now I'm looking at these faults. They're getting in the way of me enjoying your love. I want them to be lifted, and I can't do it without your help. So you got humility, you're recognizing what gets in the way, not God's bad mood, but your imperfections. It doesn't affect God's love for you. It does affect you enjoying God's love for you. And I think this is what we have to keep in mind. So there's a sense in which we buy into the negative feedback that we assess or believe we're getting. And somebody says, I never gave you I never did. I've always loved you. It's the way they interpreted whatever you were. It's not enough to tell somebody in retrospect, oh no, I loved you. If they didn't sense that, what got in the way? We give this conflicting stuff. Oh, I love you, but everything about me says, I wish you'd go away and leave me alone. Something like that. People pick up on things. So however we get this stuff that we ascertain or judge to be a darkness about us or a negativity about us, we begin to take it in ourselves. And without any contemplative practice, we don't have another way. In other words, our whole relationship with God has an intermediary, the institutional church, a priest who's got his own difficulties or bad mood, or anybody else that we give authority to can possibly give us a sense that we're not good enough and we have to do this to get good enough to get God's love. And so a lot of people, they just reject that. They reject the messenger. They walk away from it. People say, I have a problem with God. Who would ever have a problem with someone who gives you unconditional love? Their problem is with the God that was given to them, or the God of their understanding at that moment. They say, I don't believe in this judgmental God. I don't believe in that. And I said, well, good. That one doesn't exist anyway. I mean, it's unconditional love and acceptance, and Keating pounded away at that. And every time he ever got negativity, it's because people said, but God's judgmental. And they bring up all the reasons. God's going to judge you. God's going to judge you at the last judgment. You're not going to get in unless you do this, this, and this. And that's why they go after Keating. I says, well, good. Live your life full of negativity. I don't sense. The judgment is, what if the judgment, here's an example, is you come before God in some way. It's all sort of figurative, but I mean, a gazillion people, and he's going to do one after the other. That is going to take an eternity. But and you recognize the mess of your life that's still there, and then the unconditional love of God. The other thing is, nobody tells God who gets in and who gets out. No religion, no church, no ashram, No synagogue tells God who gets in and out. That is false pride, if there ever is one. It's God's decision. We do the best that we can. And I think the contemplative practice is one that's going to help us to see that and to be the best way to come to it. Now, some people say, well, I don't do this I don't know about this sitting in quiet and silence. Well, you don't have to start out sitting in quiet and silence. You can start out with anything that gives you a positive sense of the presence of God. And often people, in my tradition, which is the Catholic one, people do this with a holy card, with a statue, with a rosary, with a stained glass window. There's something that they gaze upon, back to the gaze. Or the rosary is something you do over and over again. But what you have to give yourself the permission to do, and so many of us neurotic Catholics, we have to finish something or else it doesn't work. I mean, that really is adolescent to me. You don't have to finish anything. And you don't even have to finish 20 minutes of centering prayer. It's recommended. Well, actually, Keating went to a half hour after a while. So we have to stop saying, I have to finish it to get something. God's in charge. So if it takes, you look at a crucifix or a holy card or a picture, just look at it. Gaze upon it. Rarely do any of those cards have judgmentalness about them. And maybe it's a certain moment as you just ponder that thing, that as you begin to think, all the other thoughts just become background. And then all of a sudden, there's just a nudge to put down the card and just be and be quiet. Do that. That's all. If God wants to take you into some contemplative space, emptiness, deep, that's God's doing. We don't make ourselves contemplatives. God does. We just do a practice or a method or methodology to open us to the unmediated experience of God, not given to us by any other source, but the God within in ourselves. So, we're going to take a little break now. Most of you know bathrooms are there, that corner, and that corner. Again, the basket is to help me with my ministry. And we'll come back and do more. And we are going to have a little sit at the end of the morning. We'll do a practice. Okay. We can do a little Q&A too later. This talk will be on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com, and I think it's Father Terry's Spiritual Stuff, something like that. And it'll be titled The Sacred Gaze. It may take me, it took 2 weeks to get the last one on. I had to have my techie do it. SoundCloud didn't like me for some reason. But it's really a YouTube-y type thing, SoundCloud. So if you want to listen to it, just give me about a week or so to get it on there. Is it a YouTube? Or? It's kind of a YouTube thing. It's called SoundCloud. Don't just look up soundcloud.com. And it'll be under Sacred Gaze. There's already one on there, but there's, as you'll find out, no talk is the same. The last one I didn't have the example of urchins, so I do now. Okay. Let me see if I can get this back. Okay, let's do... All right, let's start that again. How about this? Oh, there we go. I think we're now back on talking. I think. Okay. So what we're going to do on January 19th is Sacred Gaze Part 2, because I feel like I hardly even got started. give you all this stuff on Keating and the Abbot and so on and so forth. So, picking up on negativity that we get prevents us from becoming fully alive. What's that mean? Becoming, at least in the tradition of those who believe in the God of my understanding, and Keating's, and I think Joseph Boyle's, and many others, this God of unconditional love and acceptance has made us to be our unique selves. And when we become who God made us to be, we will be living fully alive. Now, that's probably not going to happen in our lifetime, but we move in that direction, and as Keating says, he'd like to know how it goes after death, because death's not the end, this sort of process that goes on beyond time as far as we know it. So you don't want that negativity to get in the way. And there's a certain kind of false pride. A lot of people think false pride is about thinking I'm better than you. There's also a false pride that says I'm not good enough. I become self-absorbed in what I see as my inadequacies. Now, they can be real concrete inadequacies that we can work on. And so they have to be an inadequacy, I think, by its very nature, or as I'm trying to explain, is something that can be worked on and developed to have us become better people. So an inadequacy could be always thinking about myself, not really thinking about others, or thinking too much about myself and not enough about the people around me and not being available to them. That would be an inadequacy. On the other hand, wanting to be 6'8" and play on the Warriors basketball team is not an inadequacy. It's a delusion. You're not going to be that, so you might as well get used to it. I was watching this. They're having games this afternoon. If you want to go over, I was watching the 4th and 5th grade girls playing basketball. Someone told me there was a game, so I put on my shirt, my red Sacred Heart of Jesus hoodie shirt, and I go over and I'm sitting there, and there are so many inadequacies going on. I realized I could not possibly coach this team. They're making so many mistakes. Now, some of those are inadequacies that can be developed. So if I was, fortunately they have a good coach. Francisco is their coach, and a fellow named Francisco. He does not yell at them. I felt the coach on the other team was yelling at the girls. He calls out instructions, encouragement, but he doesn't yell at them for making a mistake. I mean, there's full mistakes. This is a huge ball, these little people. But some of them you could see and say, okay, that particular person will develop, for sure. And you look at another person and say, okay, she can't even run. So let's hope she becomes very tall if she wants to be a basketball player. Or you could just tell some may not develop, but they're not supposed to be basketball players. They're just having fun. So you just enjoy them and hope they have fun. And if they lose, and we lost, it's the way it goes. You know, it's supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be a play. So think of prayer as play with God. Isn't that great? Playing with God. And whatever gets in the way of enjoying that relationship is maybe an inadequacy that God will point out to you. That's another thing. Keating spoke about the unloading of the unconscious. And that means that there may be some shortcomings that you could work on that you don't even know you have, or where they came from. It's often good to know where they came from. As those young people were talking last night, they were connecting the way they saw themselves with the way they felt they were seen growing up. They were making connections, whether they were valid or not, but they were making connections. And then trying to live beyond what they saw as a negative connection or disconnect. So God may point out to you over a period of time certain shortcomings or faults, maybe through other people or however, and you'll see, oh, these are things I really need to work on. A lot of us don't realize, a lot of us who have a problem with too much what Keating called false self, let's call it, paying more than is necessary attention on you and the misery of your life, more than attention than is needed, and failing to be present to the world around you in any kind of service, giving, caring, loving. You may not notice that. You live in a world in which you blame everybody and everything for your misery. Over a period of time, with a meditative practice that might have contemplative moments, God will reveal this to you, but at a time when you won't become destroyed by it, but say, oh, humility is the sense of, oh my gosh, I've got this and I can't get over it myself. Lord, help me. And then you work on it with God's help and you become a better person. This is the unloading of the unconscious. And you even maybe have a sense of why I am so self-centered. And it may be from instances earlier in your life. You make these connections and you decide at some point, I don't have to live the past. The past is over. You don't have to keep reliving it. That's part of what the unloading of the unconscious is. You look at it, you see its wounds, its sufferings, you deal with them, and often he says maybe with outside help, as he calls it, psychology, psychiatry, and so on and so forth. You deal with it, and then you say, how can I now live today, me, with whatever, as best as I can be? That's how the unloading of the unconscious can work. So we become self-absorbed in our inadequacies, and we just can't get away from it. Oh, I can't do this because, oh, woe is me. Oh, I had a terrible this, and so I can't be, oh, my mother didn't love me, so blah, blah, blah. Know thyself. We have limitations. That's a lot different than I am no darn good. We have limitations. All of us have limitations. Some of them are just the way it is. That's how we're built. But some of them we can work with, and some of them we just live with. Knowing that God loves us unconditionally. So we learn which ones I can really work on and which ones, if you can't see, you can't see. You can do certain things to see better, but at some point, that's as seeing as you're going to do. And so on and so forth. But we don't have to become depressed for the rest of our lives over these things. And we don't have to listen to the voices of others say, oh, poor you, oh, so sorry for you. You get to move beyond it. One of the things I noticed about Keating, we in Boulder, I will include myself, are very much into exercise, physical exercise, doing things for the body, Pilates and yogas and so on. I don't think Keating did any of that. Ever. He might have tried some yoga sometimes here and there because he had a yoga person in, but it was never his practice. He would take walks. Remember, Keating died at 95 without ever having the disease, except he had one when he was 5. He did have one when he was 5. But other than that, he didn't do all this physical exercise. So some of us, it's one of the things we do, and you have to ask yourself again, why are you doing it? It could be very healthy reasons. It could be trying to get over something. I'm not sure. But we all have limitations. We can't all do the same things as well, nor should we have to. And why do we always look at how little we are? Because that leads to, I'm not enough for God to love me. And that is really saying, I'm too little for God. I'm not enough. And that filters over into, I'm not enough for this person. I'm not enough for that. And there may be people, because they're damaged, that they give you the impression that you're not enough for them, but you're plenty enough. But they can't get in touch with that because they got their own issues. Could be false pride, could be just a lot of stuff. So what we get with, I think, a more contemplative practice is we begin to say, I am good enough, and I accept that you don't agree. And I don't mean somebody who's a real jerk. I mean someone who's in a contemplative practice will begin to realize, because the unloading of the unconscious will tell you where you're a real jerk. But you'll see the goodness of yourself as well, and that you're plenty good enough for God, and you're working on developing, working on your shortcomings that you can work on. And if someone doesn't like you, that's the way it is. That's their problem and their issue. Little children don't know this. They're not at the point where they know people around them are also damaged. And so they feel terrible if they don't fit in the group, if they don't get, oh my gosh. One of the hardest things is birthday parties. So you're going to have little girl's going to have, mom's going to have a birthday party, okay? Little girl's in whatever grade. Say she's in the 4th grade. It probably starts somewhere around there, maybe earlier. Okay. The 4th grade has, say, 13 girls, okay? But you can't get 13 girls into the party. There's a cutoff point. What's the cutoff point? So you come to the cutoff point, say it's 6. So you can invite 6 friends from your class. And I guess you go over with your mother or whatever. It's the 6. You invite 6. Where's the other 7? They don't get invited. What happens, one of the 7's mother calls up and says, why didn't my daughter get invited? Did she do something wrong? Was it my daughter's fault? And the mom says, no, we had to, the cutoff was 6. Had it been 7, we would have invited your daughter. I mean, so you get into these kinds of things. I mean, fortunately, I was brought up, we didn't have any parties, so I didn't have to put up with this or go over it. But, you know, it's a tough life. When you're little and you don't know all this, you're expected to know all this, so it's tough. And so you grow up and there can be a lot of scar tissue because you were one of the ones not invited. And, then you have a birthday party, and what about the girl that you didn't get invited to her party? Do you invite her to yours? And, oh my gosh, there's too much pressure. Just have a birthday by yourself, I suppose. I don't know, whatever it is. But it's tough. It's tough growing up in Boulder County. And so you do have a lot of scar tissue. But you're always good enough for God. And God celebrates your birth every day. The other thing is looking at ourselves as, I would call it looking at ourselves as too much. Really a lot better than we are. And this would be the sort of real popular kid who works at really mean popular and knows that they're popular and looks down on everybody else. Not one who happens to be popular and doesn't look down on everybody else. But this is a situation where they look down on others and they get angry when others don't see them as special, as uniquely wonderful. And that's the other way that it goes. And I think a lot of if you're in one of the denominational churches and you're looking at some daily readings or even Sunday readings the last couple of weeks, well, the daily readings in my church, the Catholic one, is, I think the Lutheran follows ours, is all about end times. Oh, gosh. End times, it's all coming to an end, it's all over, and you've got no control over it, and so on and so forth. What that can do is keep us humble. In other words, there are certain things that we cannot control. Well, we're trying to have all kinds of control and security and spend all of our energy getting more and more of that. Keating would call it programs for happiness. Not some security, not some popularity, not some control, but more and more and more. We spend all our time doing that. We don't have control. Earthquakes just happened in Alaska, 7.0, and no control. So there's things about which we don't have control in our universe. We're really quite small in that sense and have to humbly accept that. So, but that can help us then to realize our need for this relationship with God, and God is ultimately in the total control. But sometimes when you see yourself as the focus of everybody's attention, that's another way, too much self. That kind of needs to be challenged. And one of the ways it got challenged, because I also have a room at the Paulus House in San Francisco at Old St. Mary's, where I'm supposed to spend some time. And a lot of people in San Francisco got a lot of money, and they think they have a lot of power and control. Then the fires came. And so the campfire that came over 100 miles north of San Francisco, closer to 200 miles, all the smoke came into San Francisco, and all of our wealth and our tall buildings and our nice clothes and our high-tech instruments couldn't control it. For 10 days, the gyms would close. People were told not to go outside, no outside exercise. If you went outside, wear a mask. Otherwise, stay indoors and keep your windows closed. 10 days that went on. We had absolutely no control over a forest fire. And that was a great learning experience. And then I went to L.A., and then they got it. So I had to put up with it down there in Marina del Rey, because they had a fire in the Santa Monica Mountains near Thousand Oaks. So it was rough all down the coast of California, where there's all this money and yet no real ultimate control over it. One of the things that they said, though, in terms of how we live our lives, which is a big challenge, this is an aside, is it was ascertained that it wasn't, I immediately said, oh, there were trees, they all burned, and therefore the houses burned. But they said, no, look at the landscape. A lot of the trees are still standing. What happened was you built all these homes, one next to the other, with all this shrubbery around it. What happens is the fires jump from one house to the other, not from one tree to the other. And they said if it was just a forest fire, they felt they could have dealt with that. Because you say, oh, they've got to manage the forest and so on and so forth. It's not that we don't have to do that, but they said it really was all these people want to live in inaccessible places in the mountains, surrounded by forests to get away from it all. And it's just a fire waiting to happen. So there's a lot of stuff about which we say is really big issues. But I think of the forest fire as that. And whether rich or poor, none of us could breathe any better than anybody else. Have a big house or live in a shelter, you've got problems with air. And until the rains finally came, and we don't control when they come either. So we don't want to have too vaulted an opinion of ourselves. And sometimes things happen, and we realize just how little I am. But the contemplative then goes back and says, but God loves me in this world. We spend a lot of time, and I think some of us do, especially in my Catholic tradition, with impression management. We actually think that we can put a certain self in front of God to kind of get God to, shift and change and do something like that. I present me to impress God in a certain way. I mean, what would it be like if you were to say, it's a cold, cold day in Boulder. We're going to have that soon. And you're going out to your car, which has been sitting out all night long, and you're thinking, will my car start? So you say, Lord, I am a wretched human being. I have ignored you for the last several weeks. I don't pray. I don't read the scripture. I don't think anything about you at all. I'm kind of selfish and self-centered. And my kids drive me crazy. My spouse is all wrong. But please help me to start my car. Most of the time, it's not, well, you don't expect that to happen. Most of the time. There are a few people who say, Lord, I am a wretched human being, but please start my car anyway. But you have a sense that, and then when it starts, you say, oh, thank you, God, I will be good. But then you go right back to whatever you think good is. You go right back to, ignoring God, so on and so forth. So most of us, though, try to impress God by our spiritual life. And then from there, we negotiate some things. So I imagine what God wants to see in a way. Now, when I say the sacred gaze is 24/7, God sees you 24/7. So if you have little private sins that you do all by yourself and think, oh, God wasn't looking at that. God knows you through and through, better than yourself. The love doesn't change, but all those peccadillos get in the way of you enjoying it, because you get filled with shame, you get filled with guilt, and so on and so forth. And you can't enjoy the relationship. It's you that's coming and going. It's us that's not present. It's not God we have to make. We don't have to impress God to get God to show up and be nice. So we tend to, we imagine, and we do this with people. We imagine what you want to see, and then I try to present it to you. I try to impress you. Children are forever trying to figure out how to fit into the group. How they decide what the group is, and whether they're an insider or an outsider, is something I'll have to learn over a period of time, being with them, around them. But they try to figure out, what do I have to do to be part of the group, as opposed to what do I do today to be me? And so I think I've recommended, I tried in my own life, before I go exercise, or before I decide what I'm going to wear today, I try to do my quiet meditative practice, which is really what the monks do, in a sense. They pray early, and then they get on with the rest of their lives, and hopefully the rest of their lives are imbued with the prayer, the right relationship with God. So you don't sort of say, well, I should wear this today, so I'll look like this for this person, and so on and so forth. That's impression management. And you don't go out and say, now I'm going to exercise my brains out because I otherwise don't look good. And so you could kill yourself doing something. So if you put the prayer first, you keep everything in the right perspective. I don't worry about so much what you may see, because what you see could come from your damaged goods eyes, if you will. And we are not a limitless self. We can't do everything. That's an illusion. To try to, and we sometimes try to be a limitless self for those around us, to sort of manipulate their gaze. I don't want you to think I'm lazy. I want you to like me. So it's we'd be surprised to find somebody who gives us unconditional love and acceptance every day, no matter how we show up. They may not approve of our actions, but that doesn't change their love for us. A mother kind of knows that for her kid, or a father for a child. A grandparent, especially, since they get to walk away, would sort of give that unconditional love and acceptance in spite of how you act. So the thing to keep in mind is that God is a relationship. God is the verb, love. It's a relationship. It's not a job interview. You know, in a job interview, many people, they make up something and they call it a resume. They stop and they say, okay, I'm applying for a job with this company, but I don't want to say job, I want to say career, because they think I really want to give my all. And they'll say career as well, but they really mean job. So everybody's playing a game, let's say. So we write up this job resume. Oh, thank you. This job resume. And that gives us a sense, based on our sense of what we think you are looking for. I mean, you wouldn't take a job interview and walk into a big oil company and says, you're polluting the world. And I think, and I know that you're in bed with the Saudi Arabians, and I don't like it, so I want to work for your company to change it. Believe me, if I had been that negative about the church when I applied to be a priest, I would not have made it. So, in a sense, you kind of always saying, what is it you want to hear? And therefore, I'll say it. You're always making yourself based upon the gaze that you want people to have. You don't want them to see the real you. No one's going to hire you for your faults and shortcomings. You won't say, I've got so many shortcomings. I think I could be a good worker, but, I tend to procrastinate and so on and so forth. So I see this in the Paulist Fathers. We ordain all these people, and then we see their faults and their failings as they see mine. And I sometimes say, when I'm too full of self, why did you ever ordain that guy? He's a complete idiot. He's a procrastinator. Why did they make him a pastor? He never does anything till the last possible minute if he does it at all. So on and so forth. But I don't, I got to get over that stuff. And let it go. That's the way. Can I love people when I actually see their faults and failings? No, most of the time I can't. But I'm working on it. I'm really working on it. So I'm working on it. It's the edge. It's my edge. So I work on my edge. It's all good to know your edge. But with God, there's no edge. The relationship with God, the active relationship of enjoying is God's love and loving God just as God instead of what God's going to do for me. That's our career. That really is our lifelong career every day. And that career never does end. You could say, you could call baptism the beginning of a career in a love relationship with God through Christianity. Okay? And in this career, we don't get fired for our limitations. In so many places, there's dues to be paid for our limitations. So here we don't get fired for limitations, and we don't get fired for mistakes. And penance services, I think, or confession, are places where we can look at those things in a safe environment. Hopefully a safe environment. So that, and no, I'm not going to get fired. I'm not being thrown out. I'm not being rejected. It's part of me trying to grow. So mistakes are things that we discover humbly, realize we need God's help, and then work on them as best as we can. Teresa Lissot, she's a saint in my church, and she says, I'll die with shortcomings. I'll work on them, but I'll die with them. But there's a place in heaven for me with all my shortcomings. And so, not to get all upset. We screw up at times. And if we've got a damaged gaze on ourselves, we think we're going to burn. We mess up. We do. It's part of, it seems, the human condition is to be imperfect. And sometimes we mess up, and that gives us an opportunity for humility. Lord, help me. Without you, I can do nothing. God loves us even if we are addicted to sweets. Okay? So if somebody says, you're addicted to chocolate, I say, well, yes, I am. God loves me anyway. And I'm glad you don't like chocolate because there's more for me. So, it's that way. So what we want to do, I think, is to be able to spend some time trying to look at God, if you will. To look at God in a way that will have this pure gaze. So I said at the end before, you can use images. That's one of the things about art. Pictures. It's one of the things about music. You can listen. So it allows you to look, to listen to some people say sacred music, whatever that might be. But what it should be, or could be, and can help you in terms of contemplative path, is it helps you to let go of the many thoughts that are going through your mind, let them become background, and get you to begin to focus on one thing, or to become more quiet, more still. And you can do that. I used pictures. In my tradition, we got lots of holy cards and such. You can do it with scripture, reading Psalms, for instance. You can do it with the rosary. And whatever it is, you can do it with a walk on a walking path, anywhere around Boulder. That helps you to just get a little bit quieter, less frenzied. And what you want to allow yourself to do is, if you're taking a walk, to be prayerful. The walk doesn't have to be a certain distance. If it's going to be that, then call it exercise. You don't have to finish. The walk is only to, maybe you get to a point, maybe you just take your walk and not much happens. But another time you notice something, it attracts your attention. Stop the walk. And if you can sit on something, not too cold, probably not walking if it's freezing, you just glance at it. You let your attention be drawn to the one thing. That would be what they might call cataphatic prayer. The focus on one thing, so you're not focused on many things. And then maybe from that you'll get into a deeper pensive mood. And you'll just sit there and get quiet and still and be. And that's being with God. Same thing with the rosary. If you're on the third Hail Mary of the Sorrowful Mystery, and you feel just a nudge to be quiet and still, put your rosary down. God doesn't need you to finish your rosary. The rosary can be seen as something that opens you to God's action in your life. That's what centenary prayer is. It says, I'm open to your presence and your will. Your presence and your action, Lord. So God's present to you when you're doing the walk, the rosary, looking at the picture, listening to Mozart's Requiem, whatever. It's just that you allow yourself to feel that nudge, to be still, to be quiet, to stop looking, maybe even to close your eyes and be present to the presence. And then let whatever's going to happen, happen. Let God be at work. That's the way that we can have that glance at God, the mystical glance, which is unmediated by anything. It's just you and God enjoying that sense of union that's always there, but you miss because you're just frenzied with a lot of other things. So icons and images can take us to this inward experience. It's what I could call the second gaze. The first gaze is the rejection you get from so many people, or that you feel you're getting from so many people, in which you then decide that you're a worthless human being, you don't fit in, I might as well kill myself. The second gaze is kind of the second opinion. That's God's gaze. That's who you really are. And that's what I think is our career, is to keep opening ourselves to that gaze. It may not happen every day, but over a period of time, it'll happen more and more until it just becomes ongoing. Like Keating was ongoing, looking at everybody with God's sacred gaze, that kind of a thing. We go from where we feel uncomfortable with the way we think people are looking at us because they're judging us, or the desiring us, and so on and so forth. So much of our Western society is about how we look. So Claire of Assisi, Saint Clare, she was a mystic, and she called Christ the mirror without blemish. That is, Christ sees us as we truly are without blemishes. And we tend to see ourselves as blemished. We're always looking for the pimples on our soul or something like that. But Christ is the mirror without blemish. And to begin to see ourselves as if we're behind Christ, in my tradition, looking at ourselves through Christ. Come to ourselves through Christ's glance. And that's what the mystical experience can be. And she calls it the mirror without blemishes. No blemishes. And we try to allow ourselves to be open to that gaze, that kind of a mirror, on a daily basis. And our meditation can take us into seeing with the eyes of Christ. And I think that's why Jesus would tell those kinds of parables. He would bring up people that are otherwise rejected, otherwise seen as outsiders, or there'd be stories put into the Bible of the many scenes that Jesus came across, the many people he came across. Certain ones made it into Scripture. The Samaritan woman. A, she was a woman. B, she was an outsider. C, she was divorced. All three things that would be seen as blemishes that would say, you're no good. And Jesus, on the other hand, encountered her and stayed with her, even in spite of her trying to pull away from him, and suggested that he had this life-giving water, which is seeing yourself as completely loved. And I know you've been married 5 times, and you're completely loved. And that was really got the woman, because that was very different. The prodigal son, another one who was judged as less than. He was judged that way by his older brother. So you have that. The woman who comes and pours expensive nard on his feet and tears and dries them with her hair and so on and so forth. Well, she was a great sinner because she felt loved. Did it say she was no longer a great sinner? That wasn't the issue. The thing is, she felt greatly loved as she is. There was something uniquely lovable about her, in spite of whatever she might have done or whatever happened in her life. So these are the kind of stories that come up. And when we see these in Scripture, it can catch us and say, oh, that's the gaze, that's the gaze. Can I see other people that way? Am I going to begin to gaze like that? So it all opposes, this God gaze opposes popular culture, which is always in competition, always looking at one another in a certain way with these dark voices. I remember the old Miss America pageants. Oh, they make a big deal about how it's not the bathing suit thing. That was the bathing suit thing in many ways, and so on and so forth. And, they have to look, they have to sing, they have a certain talent, and so on and so forth. A lot of those, how do you look? And so little girls growing up saying, I don't look like Miss America. Something's the matter with me. And there's nothing the matter with you. Just stop comparing and contrasting yourself. You're just fine in God's likeness. And this is all a lot of popular culture, judgment values. We really are made in God's image and likeness, so we really have the capacity for unconditional love. It's just a lot of stuff gets in the way that we've gathered up over a period of time from the way other people have seen us, and we've focused it's not so much our faults, it's we believe what people tell us about ourselves, and some of it's just simply not true, but we believe it, we buy into it, and we just let it happen. But we really can become like God. One of the things about original sin, one of the things that can come up in our contemplative practice, it might not even be contemplative practice. It would just be a good examination of conscience on a daily basis. Original sin can be seen as doing over and over again the same things that don't get us any happiness, that we really say we don't want to do, the things we hate to do, and we do them again. Example, you drive your kid to school, Sacred Heart of Jesus, let's say. This doesn't happen, but let's say it did happen, just as a made-up example. I drive my kid to school. I'm not going to be a gossip. I just confessed to Father I tend to gossip. I'm not going to gossip anymore. Drive my kid to school, park the car, maybe walk them in, and then I come outside. There's 3 other women chatting. Something tells me from my practice they're gossiping. Don't go over there. Just wave to them to get in the car. But my feet are not converted. My feet are still gossiping. So I go over, and of course they're gossiping, not about me, I hope. They're always gossiping about somebody who's not in the group. So I want to make sure it's not me. So I go over, and then we start talking. Before you know it, yeah, she really is kind of bossy, isn't she? And so on and so forth. And then we go home and say, oh, I did it again. So that's original sin. And those are the things that will be pointed out to us, I think, by God. And of course, knowing that we did it again, don't want to do it, what does it do? Does it say we're hopelessly addicted to gossip? What it says is we're more powerless than we think. Therefore, we need God's help. I have to have a relationship with God on a daily basis. And I'm suggesting you need a relationship with God on a daily basis that gives you the God power, and that's from a more meditative way, not just asking God to take it away. Because a lot of people ask God to take things away, and they never get taken away. So you've got to get into that. The relationship is deep. We're just not showing up to it. We have to access that deeper relationship in a more meditative prayer so that we can, if you would, God releases the energies that overcomes us. So now you say, I am a gossip. I love gossip. I'm not going to go over there. And you go home. And you feel much better about it. So, I could say, okay, I'm trying to become spiritually evolved. I don't like children. They drive me crazy. They're messy. They don't listen. I can't stand them. And I'm going to go on a field trip. Okay? You just do it. And you grow through it. You grow through it. So it doesn't matter what you feel, what tendencies you have. There's something in you that tells you don't listen to it, don't go with it, do the other, the sort of be of service thing. It comes in many different ways. So original sin is to keep repeating what we hate to do. And in the moment, we may not hate the action. That's the other thing. We may really enjoy the action. It's later that we'll feel the guilt and the shame and the powerlessness that comes with saying, oh my gosh, I did the same thing all over again. And just the one that I use, gossip, can come from old wounds. Who knows what it is? I need to feel better about myself because I didn't feel better at some point, blah, blah, blah. But if we want to live with old wounds being in control of our lives, then we really do resist growing up. So you could say, these things happened in my adolescence, but I don't have to let them control me in my adult life. I'm no longer in the 4th grade. And I don't have to function as if I'm an outsider, an unpopular kid in the 4th grade. I don't have to go over and over again living with the idea that I was cut from being invited to the birthday party. So we tend to stay adolescent in the way we live our lives, and then we stay spiritually adolescent. And there's a certain amount of self-absorption and self-centeredness that comes with being young. Okay? It may come with being young. I mean, an infant is self-centered and self-absorbed. Well, you expect it of an infant. I mean, if I'm a priest in a church and someone brings in a baby and the baby cries, and I say the baby shouldn't cry, I mean, what world am I living in? That's what babies do. Babies are babies. You don't expect it after a certain time. It's pathetic when it's happening and you're older. We don't want to be living as infants in these grown-up bodies. And there was a movie. It came and went. I think it's going to get some Oscar buzz. It is called 8th Grade. And I went and saw it because I had heard this is a movie to see. And it was about the plight of children. And so I went, and it's a lot about fitting in, not fitting in, the way you see yourself. And so there's this girl, she's in the 8th grade now, and about to go to, so high school is next. She doesn't seem to fit in anywhere. She lives with her dad, so there's no mom in the scene. And she just doesn't seem to fit in and can't seem to get it together. She's a popular kid, so I'm not a popular kid. But she does a YouTube, if you will. And she goes in her bedroom, and she has this big white screen. So that's her background. And then she talks, and you can look at her in the YouTube, and she gives you all this great advice about how to live, how to love yourself and accept yourself, and so on and so forth. And then, she goes like this, and that's it. But she doesn't live it. She can't get herself to live it. She's imprisoned in the way other people see her, till finally at the end of the movie, she just tells the so-called popular girl, the hell with you. But she's invited to a party, and there's going to be swimming, and so she has to get a bathing suit, and my body. And I think she had to gain weight for the role, because I saw her in a picture just with other actors and actresses, and she was slimmer. So she had to have this. One of the quintessential looks of not being accepted is I'm overweight, I'm fat, and so they don't like me. Fat is a judgment, and overweight, so on and so forth, as opposed to what? So you're a kid. But 8th grade, a lot of false pride, self-contempt. There's a sense of the illusion of autonomy, but she doesn't feel autonomous. There's a sense of separating from other people and saying, I don't really need you, when in fact it's an illusion. There's the burden of not being enough, not being attractive enough, smart enough. Basically, you're not comfortable in your own skin. And there's this sort of line, going to pieces. I'm going to pieces. And when you look at, there's a story in the scriptures in which the demon is taken out. And before it is, Jesus says, what is your name? My name is Legion, it says. So it's kind of a demonic thing. It's this darkness of, and we call it we use the word, I'm going to pieces, I'm falling apart. I'm buying in to my head and all the things that other people are telling me. And it's really evil. And hopefully a more contemplative life get us to like ourselves enough so that I'm not worried so much about the way other people see me. So essentially, we have to be born again. There's this thing in religion about being born again, being born all over again. Well, there's something about that I think is very helpful. You didn't have a whole lot of power about being conceived, much less born. And being born again is something that's done for you. out of a love, hopefully. And so the idea of being born again is, okay, this is the way it is for me now. Say the protagonist in 8th grade. This is the scene now. I'm not buying into this anymore. The new you will, I say in a spiritual sense, the new you begins to come out as you practice a more contemplative way of life. If you get born again, you become what we call in the scriptures a new creation. You surrender the old, the way it was. You become a new creation. You're not going to live in past wounds. You know them. You know the triggers of them, and you're not going to let it happen. It doesn't come suddenly, but it can come over a period of time. As if you read Keating's books, Open Mind, Open Heart would be a good start. You would get that attitude from Keating. You would get it from Abbot Joseph Boyle. You get it from people who are transformed into allowing the gaze of God to come through them to you. And that's the way it's going to happen. And so you can say, some people just decide to work on their lives when they're just sick and tired of the way it used to be. And so there's becoming this new creation. To think we can do it all ourselves is an illusion. It's the false self. I can do it all by myself. You can maybe get physically fit by yourself. You maybe can get, you might be able, from some talents you have, to make a lot of money and have a lot of things. But I was just reading about Walker Percy this morning someplace in a meditation. Walker Percy was a converted Catholic, and he wrote some novels. The Moviegoer was one. And he just said he was amazed. He lived in the South, I believe. He was amazed, though, at how people could have so much and be so miserable. And I thought about that in terms of Boulder County. You can have so much things, so much accomplishments, and be so unhappy. And you might ask yourself, what gaze is looking upon me? And how do I gaze on me? And how do I gaze at the world? Because I saw the world as a place where I wanted to get ahead, or who knows what it is. You have a lot of stuff, and yet you feel empty, alone, lost, not enough, or something is just not working. And Walker Percy is one who noticed that. And I think you'd see it in The Moviegoer. He was trying to talk about the alienation of the modern person. And that was way back, I think he was back in the mid-20th century when he wrote The Moviegoer, which I read. So you can't recreate yourself. That's a work of God. God does the creations. And not to try to assume identities that are not truly me. When we're growing up, we assume various identities. We try them on. And I think that's normal, to try on various identities. But at some point, I think through a deeper prayer life, we come to an acceptance, working at it, of who I truly am. And then that's what I live out. And often it's called the third way, or the third part of our life. Often comes for people after their 50s, probably years and years ago after their 40s when we didn't live as long, and so on and so forth. So we do assume identities that are not true early on in our life, and we probably don't have very much of a meditative life early in our life. But at some point, we've tried on enough identities, and I have to say, this is who I am, and not be upset that other people aren't like you. They don't have to be like you, and they don't have to do the things the same as you. Somebody was asking me yesterday, one of the chaperones. We got to talking before the children showed up. What's the difference between the neo-catechumenal way and the Paulists? So I said, well, we both are evangelizers, and we're both needed, but we do it very differently. And I live with neo-catechumenal priests, and I see a lot of neo-catechumenal priests. And I see very few Paulists, because I'm the only one in the Rocky Mountain time zone. I have to go to California or some other Paulist place to see Paulists. But I don't say, oh, these people are all wrong, they're crazy. No, they do it. They are trying to evangelize. They reach certain people that I wouldn't be able to reach, and I maybe reach certain people that maybe they can't reach. But it's all doing the same thing, but with a different way about us. So we get to a point where I just say, this is who I am. Some of the monks have said, why don't you just become a Trappist? I said, I'm a Paulist. I said, I don't want to live all the time in the monastery. I said, this is one of the things I do. And then I do other things. I said, if I'm in the monastery, I can't go with 50 children to the museum. Well, maybe I will join the monastery. Okay. But we have to come, the part of the conversion is the conversion to being who I truly am, to living out my truth. And what did Jesus say? He says, I am the way, the truth. He says, I'm living who I'm supposed to be. And he got crucified for not being the Messiah that people wanted. All his friends thought he was going to be this political power person, and he wasn't, so they dumped him. They left him. He says, I'm the truth. I'm living me. This is what it is for God to become human. And why don't you follow me? So we become the truth of who God made us, and then we are the Christ in the world around us. And so these, I think, are things to keep in mind. Now, let me open it to questions before we do our 20-minute sit. Does anybody want to ask anything?
What do you mean when you say, I am the Christ? What does the word Christ mean?
What do I mean when I say the Christ? I am made in God's image and likeness, that I am so one with Christ, that I am Christ, but I'm not Jesus of Nazareth. I'm not the second person of the Trinity. So if you want to look at it from your head, it makes no sense. But if you want to look at it from a contemplative, it makes all the sense, because you come to the sense of that kind of union in which there is, the experience is oneness, not separation. We do a little bit of this in Christianity with the Trinity, the 3 in 1. But most people look at it mentally and they see 3 gods. And one of the things against Christianity, say by Islam, is you have 3 gods. God is one. We say, well, that's what we mean. No, you didn't say that. Well, intellectually, it makes no sense. But there's only one God, but we're all one in God. And so from a Christian perspective, I mean, a Muslim mystic would say they're one with Allah. They wouldn't say they're one with Christ, because it makes no sense to them. So this would be from our tradition. But the paths all begin to converge. And that was one of the things that Thomas Keating, one of the reasons he was so connected to non-Christian paths, is he was able, A, to listen, to learn, and to speak about our tradition in ways with which non-Christians could connect. And so he appreciated the wisdom that they had and was able to speak to them about the oneness of all of us. But you're not going to get that intellectually. So you can't study, if you study Christianity from an academic point of view, being God makes no sense. But especially in the Orthodox tradition, they will say, we are God. And everybody gets it who's mystical. And nobody gets it who's dogmatic, if you will. Yes?
In relation to that, the unconditional gaze, what is the working on the false self? Is that healing? Is it dissolving of that?
They're working on the false self. I'll make the false self, I guess, in part would be the part of you that does over and over again what you don't like. So first of all, you know it's a false self, as opposed to a person that does over and over again what's no good for them, but they don't even know that. So you recognize it, this false self. That is, it's not really the best of who you've been. It's not who God made you to be, but it's sort of attachments to your truth. But you're letting not the truth of who God made you to be your energy. You're letting the attachments be your energy. Now you know this through examination of conscience, through unloading of the unconscious in prayer. And now you say, I don't want to live with the energy of these things. How can I get rid of them or diminish their power such that they no longer control my response to the world? And that's what you want to work on. So you may die with your faults, but they become less powerful. In the 12-step tradition, I think it's the 7th step. The 7th step is where you've recognized your faults. That was your 4th step. You've told somebody, confessed, if you will, in your 5th step. And then the 6th and 7th, you say, 6th, I'm ready for these to be taken away. But the 7th step says, I think it's much more realistic, in a sense, take them away to the extent that I can be of service to others and your will be done. It doesn't say take them away completely. That's the humility that you've gained. And you're only at step 11. Think what happens when you're at step 12. Whoa. So, any case, I think that